Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Friday live questions and answers with Magdalena. We always do this on Fridays, so in case you are new, I'm just gonna do something quick. I realized I want to make sure I'm using my phone audio. Okay, there we go. That should work better. Awesome. So if you're new to this, I'm doing live questions and answers every Friday at 10 o'clock Pacific, and that's 1 o'clock Eastern. And I will take December off, but otherwise I'm gonna be here. And the questions, suppose questions, introduce yourself, tell me where you're from, where you're tuning in from, and and then what I'm gonna do is I always have questions, excuse me, printed out from week before, and because oftentimes I'm not able to catch them on the phone, because they kind of scroll down really, really quickly, so that can be kind of hard. But I then can answer them the following week. So if you post your question, most likely I will get to them, unless it's repetitive and I've already covered it. So tell me, you guys, where you're from, where you're listening from, and where you're tuning in from today. That would be, I always like to know where my audience is from, and tell me what are some of the challenges you're dealing with. What questions do you have for me? In case you're new to this, my name is Magdalena. I'm the founder of Hormones Balance, a nutrition practice that's dedicated to helping women rebalance their hormones with nutrition predominantly, but I do talk a lot about detoxification and about sleep as well as tools for getting your hormones back on track. So last week I talked a lot about hot flashes. In fact, the whole episode was covering hot flashes. And so I'm wondering, for those of you who said you're going to be joining the experiment, right? I wonder how many of you have actually done it. And I talked about three things when it comes to rebalancing your hormones and avoiding hot flashes. The first one I talked about was, and I showed how to make what I call PFF kind of breakfast. PFS stands for protein, fat, and fiber kind of breakfast, and I showed a number of examples how you can do that. I did a demo in the kitchen, so if you haven't seen it, go back to the last week's call and take a look. And then the second thing I talked about was that getting off coffee really, really can help with hot flashes. But I don't like to just leave you, it's like saying just take it out and then without any alternative plan of what else you can do what else can you do to really help yourself, right? So my suggestion for you was to use what I call they're called mushroom coffees, and I posted a link there as well. It's great because there's a brand called Six Sigmatic, and what they do is Four Sigmatic, and you can get it on Thrive as well. And the cool thing about that is that these mushrooms are also autoimmune boosters. So things like reishi, and chaga and lion's mane, they all have their own properties, but in general they support people with compromised immune systems. And we're going into the time of the year now where everybody would do some help with that. So getting off coffee can also help with with hot flashes. I'm wondering how many of you have managed to embark on trying that out and did some changes for the past week, and how has it worked for you? So if you are not listening to us live, that's okay, then just post that in the comments under the video and I would love to know. And the other thing I did was 3 weeks ago, I'm gonna have a tea while I'm talking. I've just made I brewed some fresh Tulsi tea. Tulsi, in case you don't know, it's also known as holy basil. It's a form of an adaptogen, and it's a lovely tea. It tastes a little bit like a combination between basil and, I don't know, a bit of rose, and just a very unique flavor, but very, very pleasant. So I'm gonna be sipping on that. So 3 weeks ago, I talked about also getting off oxalates. And, oxalates are kind of interesting because this is like the new discovery we're making now, that oxalates can be the cause of a lot of different symptoms like chronic pain, stiffness in joints, and especially around the limbs, and then burning sensations, vulvodynia, which is the burning sensation in the vulva, right, in women, Chronic candida can be due to oxalates. And so the list goes on. And so I'm wondering, some of you said that, oh my God, yeah, that's me. I've got chronic pain. I haven't addressed that. And I'm not saying oxalates are the only thing that is potentially is going to answer the question of why are you in pain, but it's definitely yet another tool to have in your portfolio just to check it out and see whether that's something that might work for you. Well, one of the things that, you know, is big when it comes to chronic pain is, of course, things like gluten and dairy and, you know, and nightshade vegetables, so like peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, and potatoes can be contributing towards chronic pain, especially people with rheumatoid arthritis, and just who are always, you know, very achy in their joints. Fibromyalgia, oftentimes people have a sensitivity to these foods. So why don't I go through a couple of questions. Can you guys introduce yourselves and tell me where you're from? I would love to know. And I'm gonna look at the screen here. And while you're doing that, I'm gonna look into the questions from last week and see and give you my point of view on those. So Bonnie Pellerin says, I don't get hot flashes during the day. They only come at night while I'm asleep. Yeah, so it's, you know, one of the things I talked about hot flashes is that fluctuating sugar levels. Your sugar levels go up and down. And it's not uncommon for that to happen at night. And it kind of depends on what you ate at night also. Like if women who drink alcohol have something sugary for late at night, can really experience that. But I've also, believe it or not, I have seen women who have changed their breakfasts and their sleep improves as well. So hi there, Shirley from Brossard. Is it Quebec, I'm assuming? Sounds French. Yeah, so that's an important part, you know, that breakfast. I just cannot tell you how much more I'm gonna talk about it and remind you how important it is. So Rosemary says, from Rosemary Garris Picotti, Margot from Oregon. Hi, Margot. Rosemary Garris says from Tampa, Florida, she says, can we eat eggs? And, you know, I was showing that breakfast, and it's true that I didn't show eggs. I personally have a little bit of sensitivity to eggs, so I try not to eat them too often. But my take on eggs is that, in my experience, about 50% of people I work with have a problem with eggs, and the other 50 don't. So you're gonna check out for yourself where you are with those things, and then decide if you can eat eggs or not. You know, typical symptoms of egg intolerance can be anything from eczema to having headaches to having pimples. Like that's what happens to me. I've had clients who have a lot of anxiety. Others get a lot of digestive problems coming up. And those things can be delayed, right? So they can happen like between an hour to 3 days later. So that's, food sensitivities are therefore really quite tricky. Hi, Teresa from Vancouver, BC. So, you know, if you can tolerate eggs, and how you know that you can is you cut them out for a period of 2 weeks, and then you reintroduce them. I like to do like 2 eggs. Shirley's saying she's eating Zekel bread, which is flourless bread, and that's good. Oh, I didn't realize that Zekel has flourless breads these days. The original Zekel was with sprouted grains, but they were still containing gluten. So for somebody who is gluten sensitive like myself, definitely couldn't eat that bread. So that's interesting. I didn't know about that. And Nikki DeVerol asked last week, is bacon okay instead of fish and lamb? Absolutely, yes. Here's an interesting thing about bacon. You know, we are so afraid of bacon and lard, and it's associated with something that's really disgusting or really, really unhealthy. The truth is that it's delicious, and it's, believe it or not, and I wonder if you guys knew this, that almost 50%, it's touching 50% of fats in bacon and in lard is actually monounsaturated fats. So it's the same fats that you find in olive oil. So no reason to be afraid of that. And you know, you don't have to eat a whole packet of bacon. It can just be a couple of strips. So Claire Brennan says, thanks for the breakfast idea. I watched on the reply, very interesting. I will try to join the hot flash experiment as soon as I can buy the right foods. The portions looked very big though. Not sure if I want a meal that size, so after getting up in the morning, I typically don't eat much. So that's a great point, and my answer to this is a couple of things that come up for me. serve, adjust anybody's recommendations to your own needs, right? So if you feel like that size that I was showing you, which was quite large, I mean, but that was like a large lunch dinner size kind of a portion. If that's too large for you, just scale it back. It's okay. But the second thing that comes up for me, which I think is interesting, is that people who do not get hungry in the morning, and there could be a couple of reasons for that. I often see that for women who have, or just generally people, I work with women, so I always say women. I'm kind of biased in that way. But, for women who have a lot of times gallbladder problems and don't produce sufficient bile, or the bile doesn't get to the liver, and bile really helps with emulsification of fats, but it also promotes enzymatic activity. Enzymes are there to chomp down on your food and break it down. It gets your juices going. And the other thing is that for women who have low stomach acid, a lot of the time we also don't feel hungry. So one thing you can do to really ramp up your body a little bit, and I'm wondering if anybody's doing that already, and I know many of you already are, so tell me if you are, is starting your day with 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar or lemon juice or lime juice in a glass and a cup and a half of water. Always using warm or room temperature water, never cold. We do not want to cool down the digestion and slow it down. Cold slows things down. We want to ramp it up and feel hungry and make the most out of the nutrients that you're putting in your body. So so that's something that I see. And also I see that often with women who have sluggish liver. That sense of hunger in the morning, wouldn't it cause acid reflux? Teresa is asking. No, actually, it's actually the opposite. It's one of the ironies of Western medicine is that doctors give us anti-acid medications, and I don't know how many of you, Kimberly saying she's drinking. Thanks for sharing. That's great. I don't know how many of you here have experienced this, like being put on antacids, and then a month or 2 months later developing hives or allergies or all sorts of mysterious conditions. I see this all the time. When I used to work privately one-on-one with clients, I was seeing this all the time happening. So actually, believe it or not, acid reflux is a reflection of low stomach acid and not too much of it. And I know this sounds crazy because you've mentioned that lemons can be a trigger. Well, Donald says, yes, Donald, they can be a trigger only if you have a histamine intolerance. And I'm going to talk about that later, about how can it be that we're eating really healthy food and still not feeling really well. So, so Shirley's saying she's drinking water and vinegar, and it seems to be really apple cider vinegar, sorry, not just vinegar. And that's really working well for her. Drinking lemons, mint tea. Yeah, that's, I think that's okay, but I would go with like something really, a little bit more of a punch to give it. So let me just finish the thought on low stomach acid. When you have, your esophagus ends with a little flap called LED. And that flap gets weakened when you have a low stomach acid. Your stomach is supposed to be acidic. If you were to put in a pH strip in there, those Limus paper, you should have like a pH of 2. In fact, if you were to touch a living person, they will burn your finger. That's the way it should be. Now, acidifying the stomach is really helping it. And most women, unfortunately, I see are having low stomach acid, which can result in constipation. The food sits there forever. You see food particles in your stool. You're not digesting things. You're not hungry in the morning, right? You have bad breath. Those are some of the things that are signs of low stomach acid. So what happens with that little flap at the end of the esophagus is that when the stomach is not acidic enough, that flap gets weakened. And as it weakens, that's when whatever stomach acid there is, it starts traveling up your esophagus and causing that hurt. So that's one common reason. The second common reason is that some foods can be causing acid reflux, like tomatoes, for example, chocolate, black tea, coffee, can all be culprits. So if your doctor has put you on antacids, stop, unless you really have sufficient stomach acid. How do you know you have it? You can do a little experiment. I will post it later under the notes. Let me just take it's called the baking. Actually, you know what? there is a method called the baking soda method, but I'll just tell you about a simpler one called the HCl dosing test. So HCl stands for hydrochloric acid, and is basically what your stomach is producing. You can buy that in a pill form. You can just go to any pharmacy and get it. And I don't really care for the brands. So what you do is, before having a meal, take one pill first. If you're having no burning in the stomach whatsoever, if you have no discomfort, no burn, no sensation of like just heaviness and you know, like you would know it's burning, then what you do is you have your meal, right? Nothing happens, take 2 pills, see what happens. Basically, you go up all the way up to a point where you start feeling a burning sensation. That shows you that, oh, you know, I've worked with clients before, women before, who needed as many as 6 HCl pills in order to feel anything in their stomach. And they felt wonderful when the digestion started again. Do I advocate taking HCl before every meal in the long term? If you really are low, that's a great way of fixing the problem. And by the way, the body recalibrates itself when you kickstart it a little bit with those HCl pills. Then what it will do, it will stop producing its own stomach acid after a while. So actually, I've seen most people going back to, for example, when I was diagnosed with parasites, and I was trying to, you know, fight it with herbs, I had to take as many as 6 HCl pills before I could feel anything, right? And then as the parasites clear, as my digestion improved, I basically now I take 0 or 1 sometimes if it's a larger meal and to feel something. So that's how you know. So you basically, so the dosing up, is that clear, the instructions that I've given you? So you continue with that, and you know, I prefer to kind of kick your body in its own, kick your body, give your body a little bit of a natural kick with, you know, with, let me just put this down a little bit, with some apple cider vinegar and that lemon that I talked about. HCl, do you ask the pharmacist for it? Shirley's asking. Oh no, you just walk in. It's a regular supplement you can just get off the shelf. Totally benign, easy thing to get. So yeah, so one of the things that you know, I like to do is to actually have that apple cider vinegar or lemon first thing in the morning, because, or before meals, because it's a natural way of stimulating your body to produce its own hydrochloric acid. When we rely on pills like that, we kind of get late. The body gets lazy after a while. So, you know, unless you're really, really, really low. So I'm gonna take a quick sip. So good. I'm also doing Damiana tea, which is really great too. Tastes so wonderful. Damiana and Tulsi tea this morning. So let me go on to more questions here. Marcy Davey is asking, are these suggestions good for postmenopause and complete hysterectomy issues women as well? And the answer is, since we talked about hot flashes last week, the answer is absolutely yes. Karen Bierman said something kind of interesting. She said, you know, I caught the replay. Apparently I need to show up earlier. Okay. So she says, I'm there doing the experiment, the hot flash experiment I talked about. I eat dinner for breakfast a lot. I have worked through a leaky gut program, took dairy out of my diet. I only eat wild fish and game. Identified and removed most and many food sensitivities. I have rheumatoid arthritis. Quit meds 10 months ago. Menopause for 10 years. Stopped deliberate sugar. Never drink coffee. Night sweats and hot flashes still hanging on. They have lightened up so I can sleep through the night. I'm still out searching for answers. So Karen, thanks for sharing. You know, I mean, obviously I would have to see like your full food history just to see what's going on. And but the one thing I would say that, you know, hot flashes are oftentimes, like I was mentioning, due to your sugar levels collapsing, but it's also, with that goes down your estrogen, and the whole estrogen metabolism can get out of whack really easily. So one way to mitigate hot flashes then is to bring on estrogen to your life, right? And you can do that with things like Dong Quai and things like maca. And so Dong Quai is typically done in combinations, in different herbal formulas. It's typically not alone. Oftentimes it's combined with things like fennel, wild fennel extract, etc. And so you might want to look at some formulations. I really like that company called Wise Woman Herbals. They have a phytoest combination of basically a formulation that is really wonderful, and phytoprogest so phytoprogesterone, phytoestrogen, right? These two you can look on their website. The other thing you can do, Karen Bierman, is incorporate maca to your protocol. Maca, I find, is a hit and miss, and please look at the article on my, I'm gonna post it as well. Look at my maca article on my blog, because maca can be tricky. Some women have really negative reactions, which defeats the purpose of what we're doing here, and then others feel really wonderful, can live without it. In fact, there's one woman who emailed us and saying, I could not live without maca, like quite literally, and she described her case. Maca really depends on the form you're taking. Gelatinized is the way to go. There's different strains, and so read the article and get the best practices from there, just to make sure you get the best maca possible, and that will help you with bring up your estrogen as well. Valdoria Maori said, the biggest problem I have are three big, how do you feel about symbiotics? Marianne is asking. I don't actually know what symbiotics are. Valdoria is asking, biggest problems I have is three big fibroids and no sex drive currently. So Valdoria, and I'm sure this is not an uncommon problem. A lot of women have had fibroids at some point in their lives. Fibroids relates to estrogen dominance, right? That's a classical symptom, is estrogen dominance, same as endometriosis, having lumps on your breasts, having lumps on your thyroid. In men, having prostate problems is estrogen dominance issue as well. You know, a lot of times men who have prostate problems also have man boobs, right? So all estrogen, too much estrogen, or bad form of estrogens. So what can you do? There's so much that you can do, and I would encourage you to listen to my Cooking for Balance program. It's a free workshop, and I talk there about what can you do from estrogen perspective quite a lot on digestion. Supporting the digestion and the liver are really two huge things for estrogen dominance, because estrogen gets metabolized in our gut. There is a subset of bacteria called the estrobolome, and then what happens is, so that's where estrogen gets metabolized first. And number two is that the liver is what gets rid of metabolized estrogen. So those two, body systems are super important. So listen to cookingforbalance.com, the free workshop. It's called How to Use Food to Rebalance Your Hormones, and get educated on that. Let's see. All right. Let me see what else came in last week. Somebody's asking about saliva testing for thyroid and hormone tests. Kim Bloggings is asking for that. So you don't do saliva testing for thyroid. Thyroid, you do it through blood. And the full panel includes your TSH, which is very standard. You want to do free, not total, free T4, free as in FREE, T3, right? So those are the three basic ones. And then you want to do two antibodies called thyroperoxidase, so TPO antibodies, and anti-TGB, anti-thyroglobulin antibodies. So 5 markers for thyroid, you do it through blood. If you have a doctor who is not supportive and wouldn't do the full panel, because unfortunately a lot of doctors just want to do TSH and T4, total T4, which are useless markers. Just to share with you, I had a thyroid problem. I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's in 2008, horrendous symptoms, and because my TSH, even free T and free T4 were within range, and believe it or not, even within the functional medicine range, which is much more narrow, by the way, than what labs give you. What labs give you is a range for sick people, really, because that's how they define it, is through averaging it. And since so many people are getting really sick, these averages are getting wider and wider now. So you want to look at functional medicine range. And hi, Eric. So you want to look at the functional medicine ranges. And so it was really fascinating that part of the reason why I couldn't I was never put on any medication for thyroid is because my thyroid numbers looked perfect. but my antibodies were skyrocketing. My TPO antibodies were over 1,000, but they should be below 30. So what is interesting about that is that, you know, you want to really get the full picture. In case your doctor is reluctant to help you, go to directlabs.com, and that's when you can order the labs yourself. You know, isn't that really cool? So yeah, let's see what else is coming up here. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what we have from last week. Irene is saying, let me say, I'm 55, still not in menopause. However, I'm starting to notice some hair loss and very occasional hot flashes. What is the holistic approach to this? So great question. I'm not going to talk about hot flashes anymore because I talked about it all up to now. And then I talked about it last week. So Irene, can I encourage you to listen to last week's call that I did, and it's still available on Facebook. If you scroll down many posts down below the Facebook fan page, you will see me talking about hot flashes last week and exactly what to do. And so I was running something called the hot flash experiment I invited everybody to, which was basically talking about do those 3 things: change your breakfast, get off coffee, stop drinking booze at night, and see how you feel. So I know there's only been a week. Some of you might need to like change your meal plan or talk to your family about changes because everybody's eating cereal for breakfast. I get it. So that's fine. Don't worry about it. But make sure that you do it and let me know in due time how are things going for you. So same thing with oxalates. I know some of you found it really interesting that oxalates could be potentially a problem. So I would love to hear from you if you have removed oxalates, and then how has this helped you. So let's see. One of the topic for today that I wanted to talk about is what I mentioned, you know, in the post is. Shirley saying, love your video, signing up this weekend. Great, thanks Shirley. Welcome to the, are you talking about the Cooking for Balance program, I assume? So one of the things that I want to talk about today, the theme for today is, you know, why is it that you might have a really clean diet or trying to eat really well, and you're still plagued by some kind of symptoms, you know, whether your hair is still falling out, you can't lose those last 20 pounds, you know, you can't sleep at night, whatever. I mean, there's so many, right? I can just go on and on with those symptoms. And so sorry, I'm just gonna sip quickly. I'm in Boulder, Colorado, and it's really dry, generally dry. Today's exceptionally dry. We haven't had rain in like weeks. And so I always feel like my throat dries up really quick. So yeah, so, you know, I find it really quite fascinating, and I just want to say to you, share with you a couple of concepts. The first one is that what I see is that sometimes one person's food is a really healing source for them, and it can be a real enemy and a detrimental food to another person. I want to give you a couple of examples here. So I think Donald was mentioning earlier about that I mentioned something about lemons being detrimental. And that is true, but of course not for everybody. So that's why generalizations can be dangerous, right? So for people who have a problem with histamine intolerance, meaning that there is a buildup of histamine, which a normal person with normal digestion, normal functioning liver can break down these histamines really quickly and evacuate them. For people who have a histamine problem, they don't let go of the histamine so easily. And so imagine it's like a bucket, and that bucket gets filled up with histamine. When it gets overflown, symptoms begin. And typical symptoms of histamine intolerance is things like a lot of migraines, having hives, anxiety attacks, just being worried all the time, you know, allergies, right? And just feeling off. And you know this from consuming certain foods. Like, unfortunately, lemon is, you know, is high. All the citrus vegetables are high. Alcohol is high. So anything that's aged as well is high in histamines. So imagine foods like sauerkraut, right? Which is so great. I mean, there's so much of awesome stuff in sauerkraut, not just the probiotics, but also the amount of vitamin C that's in there, the vitamin Bs that are bioavailable is much higher than in a common, like in a regular cabbage. I mean, sauerkraut is amazing, right? Eastern Europeans survived winters by eating sauerkraut. But if you have a problem with histamine, it's gonna give you hives. It gives you headaches. You're gonna start scratching all over the place. Your sinuses are gonna explode. You start getting puffy on the face, right? So that's an example of a food that is it can be detrimental, and that kind of goes back to my whole concept. I talk about at length in the free workshop that I always reference, Cooking for Balance, is that eating well and eating right for your body are two very different concepts, right? So, like I said, you can take DAO enzymes to help process histamine. Sure, I mean, that helps some people, not everybody. Actually, histamine can be quite complex. It's not a solution. It's not a one-point solution. If it was that simple, people wouldn't be having as many problems with histamine as they do. And so my friend Yasmina is running a really great website called the Low Histamine Chef. So if you are struggling with histamine problems, join her site. It's the DAO enzymes help, but there's a lot of other things that can and should be done for people. Okay, can you guys hear me now? Let me just, I think you can, I can see the little sound thing popping out, so that should be good. Just to confirm that you guys can hear me. Yep, okay, cool. Thank you, Sandy. So I was just talking about things like, for example, grains. Grains is a really great, another good example of like, everybody talks about quinoa and I love amaranth. I love amaranth porridge just because amaranth is, I love teff, teff flour. I love teff porridge because it is so high in protein. You've got 2 times more protein in teff, for example, grain that you have in rice, for instance. So really wonderful grains. But here is the thing. If you're doing paleo, then maybe that's what's working for you. That's because you're not tolerating these grains very well. So how can it be that a healthy food like that, right, can be a source of nourishment for people for generations? I mean, if you go to Ethiopia, for example, people live on teff. You go to China, it survived on rice. Things like meat and vegetables. Vegetables maybe were not sparse, but fish and meat were a rarity and were special food. For people back in China, they lived on rice. How can they have lived on it and we can't? And the answer is we have compromised our digestion quite seriously, right? And that's why we have all these different food sensitivities. Whether it's a low stomach acid, whether it's stress, whether it's pollution, whether it's the toxins that play a role. The list goes on and on and on, right? Poor, our food, the quality of our food today. So I don't want to sound like doom and gloom here, but I just need you to be respectful of the fact that just because somebody says, oh, paleo has worked for me, that's wonderful, I'm doing AIP, I'm doing paleo, I'm eating bacon like 3 times a day, right? It's working, I'm losing weight, my energy is back up. And, is that, Shirley's asking a good question. She's eating black beans and quinoa and she's having pains. Could that be too much carbs? No, I wouldn't say carbs. I mean, it's a very unfair thing to say because all the good vegetables are carbs too. Kale is carbs and sugar is carbs too, and lentils are carbs and rice is carbs. So Brussels sprouts are, broccoli is a carb as well. So I don't like the classification because it doesn't really tell us anything. No, I think you should just look into beans. Unfortunately, beans are a common problem because of the high amount of lectins and that it contain. And I'm very popular today. My phone just keeps buzzing. That's kind of annoying. I need to turn it off next time. And that can be the cost. Before you take beans off your list, I would do one thing is I would soak them and overnight, 24 hours is even better, and change the water maybe a couple of times, and then cook them with kelp, K-E-L-P, or kombu, kelp, and they tend to degas them really well. If you can't tolerate it, then you're gonna take beans off your diet. Beans, I find people having more problems with beans than with lentils, and especially with things like red lentils that cook really quickly and are much easier to digest. You don't soak them though because they get all mushy. That tends to take care of the problem. So this is a good example, right, of lentils and black beans. I mean, if you go to Brazil, I mean, people live on beans. If you go to Cuba, which I know probably most of you haven't been because most Americans couldn't travel there until recently, Cubans live on beans. And so you think like, well, if you take those beans out, in fact, they really didn't have a lot of meat during all these communist days and the Castro, right? So so it's kind of interesting. How can they do that? Because their digestion is not as messed up as ours. That's really what it is. I want to go back to give you a couple of other examples. FODMAPs is another, FODMAP, you spell it F-O-D-M-A-P. FODMAP is another great example of a form of sugars that are found in various foods, very innocent foods like onions and garlic and pomegranates, and dates are high in FODMAPs. But for example, maple syrup is not high on FODMAPs. And, see what else, like, I think sweet potato is not, no, it's not. Sweet potato is also high in FODMAPs, right? So, all these wonderful foods, I mean, I talk a lot about it, like how garlic is so beneficial in so many different ways, and together with onion, it's like source of sulfur, and that's the whole sulfation pathway in the liver needs that sulfur to process a lot of the different toxins, to evacuate things and metabolize. So isn't it fascinating? But a person who's got a problem with foods that are high in FODMAPs will have constant distension. So gassy, you've got digestive pain, you might be getting either loose stool or getting constipated or in between those two. In fact, the FODMAP approach was developed many, many years ago, it was 1930s, and by a nutritionist and to treat IBS. And so it was revived about a few years ago by an Australian university called Monash. So, one thing you can do is, I think my whole point to all of this is talking about the different things you're sensitive to and whatnot. What's really helpful, you guys, is to, let me just read the question. Do you think a raw cow milk yogurt should be classified as part of the dairy with the elimination diet? Of course, I mean, that's dairy. And when you're doing the elimination diet, you want to get off dairy. And that includes, obviously, yogurt and raw dairy milk. There's people who have a real problem giving up dairy. It's kind of an interesting thing I've noticed is that dairy creates, actually, together with gluten, those are two of the most addictive foods. And if you're finding yourself having a really hard time giving up dairy, that could be because of a form of an addiction your body has created. Because guess what? Dairy, which contains a protein called casein, together with gluten, there are specific proteins that have an impact on the same part of your brain as opioids, right? So for people who do things like heroin, smoke opium, right? It's a numbing mechanism. And so guess what? Like mac and cheese, what is that? It's called comfort food, right? Comfort as in numbing. Hi there, Penny. is numbing the pain. And so isn't it fascinating that foods like that can be really, really addictive, and that's why we find it so hard to get rid of. Rachel is saying lactate is gluten-free. Yeah, that's why these foods can be so difficult to get rid of our diet. But also a lot of times, what I have found is that the more you are addicted to some food, the more of a sign it is that you should give it up. So a lot of people push back and say to me, hey, Magdalena, but it's raw milk, right? It's not processed, it's not pasteurized, it's not homogenized. And I get that. But if you have a problem with dairy, you have a problem with dairy, period. That's not going to change. And most women I know have a problem with dairy. And that includes yogurt as well, even though in yogurt you are basically getting rid of all the lactose, and lactose being eaten up as a sugar by the bacteria, but you still have casein. And some people even have a problem with whey. So if you're really sure you can have it, great. But I would encourage you to use it more as a bike lane kind of a food. So I call it a bike lane, where it's not your main street food, right? Your main street foods is the stuff that I always talk about. You see on my website, tons of recipes, hormonesbalance.com, and not be dependent on dairy too much. So, how does this resonate with you, like what I said about that eating well and eating right for your body are two different things? Can I just have some feedback here and see what you guys are thinking? Like, do you think that you're eating really healthy foods, but these foods might not be serving you well? And, I'm going to take a quick sip while you guys can type and tell me. Makes sense, Shirley is saying. So I'm wondering, what are the foods you're suspecting that could be a bit of an issue? And here's how you can do it. So I'm going to talk about two more things before wrapping up the call today. One is, what do you need to do to find out what is the food problem? And number two is that what things other than the food can impact your digestion, okay? So Andrea is saying absolutely. Yeah, thanks. So a couple of things. I'm a big fan of keeping a food journal. And what you basically do is you set up, a banana's okay if you have adrenal fatigue, says Bahare. I don't see why not. The problem is, the question is, it's not a problem. The question is, Rachel is saying that certain foods give me a reaction like fluttering and palpitations. There you go. Actually, that's a really great point. Thank you, Rachel, for bringing this out. Heart fluttering, yeah. So these symptoms can really be a sign of food sensitivity. In fact, one of the things I'm going to talk about this, how to do an elimination diet, is you keep a journal. And when you start journaling, start off with a journal first and start writing out, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and everything in between, what you eat, what you drink. Keep it for a week. And then when you go back to it, then you start looking at patterns. And you go like, oh, a lot of times you might notice like I'm eating the same things, or every time I eat chocolate, that's another one, chocolate, high in oxalates. Every time I eat chocolate, I'm get these really sharp pains, or my vulva, my vagina hurts. Every time I have a soup and it's got onion in it, because Magdalena talked about onions and garlic, every time there's onion in my soup, I get bloated and I get like explosive, episodes in the bathroom, right? So start noticing that, and you'll be quite amazed how much of a detective you can be. Then what I would suggest is go on a full elimination diet, and I talk about it in the cookingforbalance.com, that free workshop. I talk about the foods to remove and how to do it. But which foods, find out from there which foods and how to do the elimination diet. But one of the things that I want to talk about, what Rachel mentioned here, is that when you reintroduce the food, for example, you take off eggs. We started off by talking about eggs. You remove the egg for a period of at least 2 weeks. I like to do it for 3 to 4 weeks. And for most of you, you might notice you start feeling so good that you actually want to continue on eating this way. So eating a full elimination diet, because you're removing certain foods, but you can still have all the meats and vegetables and abundance of vegetables. You're cutting out maybe a few of them, but you can still have all the broccoli and Brussels sprouts and beets and, the list goes on, right? And so then what you do is reintroduce that food one after the other. You always want to start off with the food that's least problematic, you think, right? So let's just say, for example, you introduce perimenopause seem to handle dairy okay, but it's not good for. Yeah. So Brittany's saying she thinks she's. I mean, Brittany, I mentioned that if you think dairy is really serving you well, then great. If you're having a lot of symptoms, digestive symptoms, body pains and aches, whatever else is going on, then I'm suggesting and recommending removing dairy for at least 2 weeks and reintroduce it and see how you feel. Because I really see, 70% of women having quite a lot of problems with dairy, and many of them are in denial about it. So, you would only know if you have a problem and don't have a problem with the food if you take it out for a period of time, eat without it, and then reintroduce it, then then it's really not a problem. So back to that heart palpitations is that when you reintroduce that food, let's say, for example, you introduce eggs back in again. And one of the things you can do is you take your own pulse. You can take your pulse by measuring it here on your wrist, or you can do it here on the side, right? You can feel your heartbeat. Do a full heartbeat before you start eating. And let's just say you have, 56 heartbeats per minute. Do a full 60 seconds. Right, so measure your pulse, really simple, anybody can do that. So let's say I have 56 heartbeats per minute, right? And then you eat those eggs. And then within 15 minutes, you measure your pulse again. And for some people, the pulse goes up like poof, really quickly. And that pulse is basically, if your pulse increases by more than 10 beats per minute, then it's a really good chance that food is a problem. So this doesn't work for everybody, but it's yet another tool to have in your portfolio. So I would recommend for you to try it. Shirley was asking if I don't use milk, what do I use? Oh my gosh, a lot of different things. You can make nut milks if you can tolerate nuts, like almond milk, rotating that with, you can make sunflower milk, you can make cashew milk. They're all really yummy. If you cannot tolerate that, you can do coconut milk. Rachel, thank you. Coconut milk. And, I make my own milks because the stuff in a store, I just don't like all these preservatives and additives they're putting in. They have to, unfortunately. But, it's like I would just take dry coconuts, and put it in a Vitamix with water. So typically I use 1 cup of coconut milk to 4 cups of water, and then just blend the heck out of it. And for about a minute or two until it becomes like really integrated, and then put it through a cheesecloth, and what comes out is your coconut milk, and it will stay fresh in the fridge for about 5 to 6 days with no problem. That's super easy substitutes. And for those of you who having a problem with nuts, or you can't tolerate coconut and beginning to see more and more of that, unfortunately, I have an alternative for you. I talked about it many times before, something called tiger nuts. They are not nuts, they are tubers. And they're wonderful. And just making milk out of that is on the sweet side. For those of you who've been to Spain, you might know, or I think in Mexico they have it as well, but I'm not sure how they make it in Mexico. In Spain, originally in the south of Spain, the horchata, right? If you've had horchata before, horchata originally was made with tiger nuts. And so they are hypoallergenic. Most people, I don't know anybody yet who has a problem with them. And they are tubers, they are full of fiber, they are full of prebiotics. Really wonderful food to try. So Sandy's saying she was shocked to see how much fat there is in a cup of homemade coconut milk, 520 grams. I think it's a little bit old way of looking at things. Fat, first of all, you don't need to drink the whole thing. And number 2 is that fats are good. We need fats. Guess what? Cholesterol is your building block for pregnenolone and for all your steroid hormones. So all your hormones, including progesterone, estrogen, cortisol, DHEA, testosterone, are all made of cholesterol. So fat is good, and coconut is one of the sources there. So again, it's not about overdoing, it's about just eating it in moderation, right? All right, you guys. So let me know about how it goes with who's joining the hot flash experiment, or if you want to just rebalance your sugar levels. That's a wonderful way to start off. And I hope that you will try out the elimination diet this week, starting off, or whenever you get ready, before the festive season starts, because once we get into the Thanksgiving and beyond, that's just not the time to do it. So this is the good time to do it right now. is, start experimenting, do the full elimination diet, go to cookingforbalance.com, do the free workshop, learn how to do the elimination diet, set up a journal, and get started. One final thought before we part is, I mentioned before, can food fix everything when it comes to digestive issues? And the answer is, as much as I would like to say yes, the answer is no. Because I'm biased, right? To me, like, food is medicine, and it truly is. There are there are cases, and sometimes as many of them is basically what's the cause could be infections. And those things will be things like parasitic infections. When you have parasites, no matter what you eat, it's gonna be sabotaging your health. So you're gonna get rid of parasites. You can get tested for them through doctor's data. You can order that on directlabs.com or work with your functional practitioner on that. And then, other infections like bacterial infections like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, where bacteria from the large intestine go into the small intestine and create a havoc. That's another one. And a lot of other things like H. pylori, things like chlamydia. I mean, just the list goes on. If you have infections like that, they're always going to be really sabotaging your gut, so much so that no matter what you eat, you're always going to have a reaction. So that's something that I definitely recommend to get, just to clear that out. But that's the way I like to go. I would recommend for you to go about it is to do the elimination diet first. And if you know that you've cut out those highly problematic foods, and you've listened to my talk and you're like, I don't have histamine problems, I don't have FODMAP problems, I have these erratic reactions to foods, then it very well might be that you're having those infections I talked about. And that's when you should see a functional practitioner, get testing done, and then a new world might open up to you going like, oh, that's why I've been trying so hard for the past 2 years to eat well and I'm still not getting well. Okay? So that's it for me. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. One thing I want to suggest to you is do something that makes you really, really happy. Like, what would that be? Can you just post that before we go? Like, what's the one thing that makes you really happy that you can make a commitment to be doing this weekend? For me, I really like deep tissue massage. I get a real kick out of it. And I found an incredible massage therapist. And so I'm booked every Sunday at 5 o'clock with her for 2 hours. So what will be the one thing you're going to be doing? And I'm going to go for a hike, for a walk, because it is still so wonderful here. It's very warm. The summer is not going away. Rachel's saying she's going to be walking on the beach. Nice. Let's see what else we have here. Taking my dog for a walk in a hot bath. Nice. There's something about hot baths and jumping in hot springs, and that moment when you get in, it's like, right? That's a huge oxytocin boost that we're getting at that point. So really great things to offset your cortisol levels. We're going to be talking about adrenal fatigue at some point too. All right, everyone. Thanks so much. And I hope to see you next week. Bye for now.